Commenting on the Heart Sutra. So it's on the other side of your chant sheet, so if you want to follow, you can, but it's just been doing a few lines at a time, and tonight, we're really just going to do the one line, which happens to be the main line, so to speak, primary proposition of the Heart Sutra. Well, let's put it this way. I just was reading today in this new book by Brad Warner, who's a Zen priest, American. His books are wonderful. They're very, as insightful as they are humorous, which is to say, very. So I recommend them. But in this chapter, he says, when you first encounter Buddhism, there are all these concepts you can't really understand. I'm not talking about things like reincarnation. There are subtler matters than that in men. For example, what do you do when you first encounter lines like, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, in the Heart Sutra? And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. He says, at first it just doesn't make much sense. Well, we'll see if we can make some sense. So that is the line. Form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness no other than form. Form is exactly emptiness. Emptiness exactly form. Form and emptiness roughly equivalent to absolute and relative. But these are all just words. In fact, I like, as usual, I like very much what Hakuin, remember the great master from the 17th and 18th century, has to say about this. Since emptiness isn't destruction of form. Form is the flesh of emptiness. Forms don't hinder emptiness. Emptiness is the tissue of form. Like the flesh of it. It's very interesting. But what he says about this whole thing, juggling with words, is what it is in the end. No matter how profound. He says, a nice hot kettle of stew. He ruins it by dropping a couple of rat turds in. What are the rat turds? Emptiness and form. So you've got the stew of trying to understand reality, and you're dropping these turds into it with these words, which one can wind up just getting in the way. He says it's like striking aside waves to look for the water when the waves are the water. It's right here. Don't be trying to distinguish waves and water. Emptiness and form, it's one of the images that's used. It's just all what it is, here and now. So there are, a number of, quite a few koans which could be interpreted in this sense, to help illustrate, to be catalysts for your awakening to the reality that emptiness is form, form is emptiness. Not identical, but not separate. Not one, not two. That we've commented on before, the famous one from Joshu in the Gateless Gate, the Monkan, where Joshu is asked, what is reality, what is the Buddha? And he says it's the oak tree in the garden. So the ultimate reality is no other place and no other thing really than right there in front of you, right here and now. The form is the emptiness, and the emptiness is the form. The absolute doesn't abide in some palace up in the sky, apart. It's right here and now. And this is also very Christian in terms of the incarnation, the presence of the Creator God, etc. It's right here, the oak tree in the garden. And if you're truly present as the tree is fully present, and fully present in and with that, you've experienced all you'll ever need to experience. It's right there. Emptiness is form, form and emptiness, emptiness is form. And not one, not two. Another very famous koan, again, Joshu, that illustrates that from the Blue Cliff Record. The famous one about snow in a silver bowl is what reality is. snow in a silver bowl, both white, almost indistinguishable one from the other when you get snow in a silver bowl, and yet they're not totally identical. Form and emptiness are together, not one, not two. But there are different ways to approach this and different ways to experience it. And I'd like to look at a couple of those as well, besides the koans themselves, which of course can be immediate catalysts to the experience of this, to waking up to this reality of form and emptiness, emptiness form. Remember I recommended The Infinite Circle, Teachings in Zen by Roshi Bernie Glassman. And he has this to say about the function, emptiness and form. We have two terms that we use in this regard, great death, interesting, and great rebirth. Great death is seeing that everything is just one thing. There are no separate entities. That's the emptiness. We saw, the five conditions last week that are all empty, that have no substance in themselves, but everything together is related. There are no separate entities. In that sense, you die every second. Something Brad Warner also points out in his book again. Come to life, you would die and rise, to use the Christian terms, every moment. If you're truly awake, you die to the limitation, to the separation, to the illusion, not to mention the greed and the hatred, and you rise to the fullness, the emptiness, to what the interconnectedness of everything. And that's the phrase that is used here, the great death, which is a Zen term as well. Again, the phrase that Joshu uses. And great rebirth. So there's no me, he says, I've completely died. Everything has died in the great death, insofar as separate and isolated. There are no sticks, no flowers, no trees, not even the oak tree in the garden is separate. You have to wake up to the full reality there, where form is empty. When we truly see that state, that moment is also the great rebirth, he says. You're also, you, whatever that means now, you are reborn, which is seeing that everything exists and functions beautifully and totally as it is. The oak tree and the goat. They are the same state. Emptiness is form and form is emptiness. So you cannot have great death without great rebirth, no passion without resurrection, we Christians would say. And so he says, so you cannot have wisdom without compassion. He takes it that way. Wisdom is seeing the emptiness of all, the connectedness of all things, but then compassion is going out to the form, which is one with him, and living in from and in that compassion to the form, to the individual thing with our person, which is right there. So that's the functioning of wisdom. It's a functioning of the plane of wisdom. It's a very interesting approach to it. The title of Brad's new book might itself be a good illustration of what we're talking about. He says, there is no God, and he's always with you. So, empty. There's no God. You can't point out up there somewhere some individual, separate, isolated thing called God. It's empty. No God. But it's not atheism. It's not nihilism. He says he's always with you. In the form, right here and now, in front of you, the oak tree, the person in need, whoever it is, yourself. So that itself, the title itself, is an illustration of that paradox of emptiness is form, form is emptiness. But there's one way especially that fascinated me, especially as I was reading something in Hakui. It reminded me of another totally fascinating way of approaching this, almost from a moral point of view, as we've already seen a bit with wisdom and compassion. It's to see that the skandhas, the things that we call empty, are themselves then the riches that are there, even though they seem to be negative, just sensation and conception and all of that. He says perception is like the diamond sword. If if you wake up to what it fully is. Conception and consciousness like the gem that fills the heart's desire. In other words, the absolute reality, the jewel that Buddhism talks about. Even conception and consciousness, which seem to be so limited and so empty, as we just said last time, as the Heart Sutra was just trying to point out, is also emptiness in this deeper sense. When you wake up to it, just like the singularity of the oak tree, it's everything you would ever want. So how does that work? It tells a wonderful story, Hakuin does. Talking about the shadow in the guest's cup never was a snake. Now, what he's talking about is a story in the Chinese story about an official who comes and he's given a large cup of wine, but when the friend of the official takes the cup to drink it, he thinks he sees a snake in there. He drinks it anyway and he gets sick. But when he goes back again, his friend asks him, so did you find a snake in there the last time? And he says, yes, well look again. So he looks again in this new cup of wine and thinks he sees the snake again, but then it's pointed out that there was a reflection, a bow hanging on the wall that was reflected like a snake in there. So you're drinking the cup of life, cup of wine, and you think there's a snake in there that's going to harm you, and it turns out to be just your illusion that it's really a snake that's going to harm you. Now, see where I'm going with this, or where, in fact, Hakuin goes with this. He says this recasts a story by the Buddhist scholar Nagarjuna. Now, this is already interesting. Nagarjuna was the great, if you like, metaphysician of Mahayana Buddhism, in more or less the 3rd century. One of the great patriarchs. And he is the one that made famous by his philosophy, emptiness is form and form is emptiness. They really are. Nirvana is samsara, etc. So it's intriguing that this comes from him, precisely. And Nagarjuna means, in Sanskrit, the Lord of the Nagas, which are snakes. They're mythical snakes with more or less the human head, which represents ultimately enlightenment. The serpentine, scary dragon Kundalini energy, which comes up and turns out to be human, just like all the Chinese dragons with almost a wise face, even in the midst of their being a beast. Why are we afraid of the snake when it's really us? Human, animal. So this is where the emptiness in form really comes in, and as you see the blend, how it actually works out in practice. The story is, and this is the verse. The ogre outside shoves the door of the cottage. The ogre inside holds it fast. Dripping sweat from head to tail, battling for their very lives, they keep it up throughout the night. One ogre on one side of the door, one ogre on the other side of the door, pushing in, pushing out. Until at last, when the dawn appears, the dawn. Their laughter fills the early light. They were friends from the first. So the story is these two friends are walking, and they come to a cottage at night for lodging, but they get separated just before they get there. And the one friend goes into the cottage, and the housekeeper says, well, I don't know whether you want to stay here because it's really dangerous here. There are ogres I have to fight during the night, all these fears that we have. Well, it turns out there is a knock on the door, and the friend thinks, oh my God, it's an ogre. So he becomes like an ogre trying to push the one out, and he quotes ogre on the other side of the door, is pushing on the other side, and they both think they're ogres, and meanwhile they're just friends, as they discover when dawn comes. What is this a parable of? It's a parable of these different aspects of reality which we think are in conflict, and they turn out when the dawn comes, in laughter we discover that they're really friends. The dragon becomes the enlightened. Kundalini rises. Or look at how many traditions speak this way and in certain ways. The Jewish mystical tradition speaks about, Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, which is the good impulse and the bad impulse. And the wisdom is, you gotta have both. They gotta work together. You can't exclude, quotes, evil one, because it's part of the whole. And just today, I was reading, a Jewish commentary on the Feast of Purim, which is apparently now, and even in our Catholic liturgy, we had the story of Esther today, which gave rise to Purim. And one rabbi is quoted as saying, Purim is for partying. Here we are with the wine, a cup of wine. And the rabbi says, you should drink so much that you can't tell the difference between Mordecai and Haman anymore, which are the villain and the hero of the story, if you know the story of the Book of Esther. Notice, the more intoxicated you are with life, the more unity is attained. You can't even tell the difference. The tree of knowledge of good and evil is overcome because you even that. This is not to say there isn't such a thing as good and evil. That's a big mistake, as Roshi Glassman points out in the book as well. But it is to say that these impulses cannot be too quickly judged, and they're all meant to be integrated into one whole. Emptiness is form is emptiness. In that sense, too, the ultimate, and then what seems to be imperfect and unformed is yet part of the whole as well. I've shown this to you before. In Tibetan Buddhism, they put this forth very graphically. Here it is: the door, the Vajra, Vajrayana, the diamond thunderbolt. This represents, it represents the spiritual life right here. Here's the unity in the middle, the unity of life, the unity of emptiness and form together. But on the other side, you have the emptiness and the form, in this moral sense that we're talking about, and precisely in this sense. The 5 prongs, 4 prongs and the one in the middle, represent the 5 Dhyani Buddhas and their wisdom, associated with the different chakras, the crown chakra, the Ajna chakra, the throat chakra, the heart chakra, and the navel chakra. And, the different perfection that goes with that, the different virtues, the different colors, etc., the different spiritual luminosity that goes with that. But on the other side, to balance it off, to make it a whole in terms of the energies coming together, you have it to easily be dismissed as the form, the materiality, the passion, those energies, which, corresponding to those 5, would be, ignorance, envy, desire, anger, and greed. All those poisons, as they're referred to in Buddhism, greed, anger, and ignorance, illusion, don't dismiss them. The Yetzer Hara has to be part of it. The ogres have to work together, and when they do, the clash produces the unity. The clash produces the enlightenment. People are so afraid of form, so afraid of these energies, that we don't realize that the 2 dimensions work together to form the whole. When dawn comes of enlightenment, there's laughter because they were friends from the start, after all. And there's still another example from Hinduism of this. The great Hindu myth of the churning of the milk sea, which I discovered, and I believe I've spoken before of this when I went to Cambodia, to Angkor Wat. They have a vast, stone relief on the side of one of the temples in Angkor Wat, depicting this cosmic primordial myth, cosmology, with exactly the same idea. Here you have is like a fulcrum point of Mount Sumeru, or Mount, you can call it that, that's the Zen name, for the mountain at the center of the universe, the fulcrum of reality. But what happens with it, to bring about life, You have a milk sea. I don't have to point out all the sexual imagery here, but you can guess for yourself. It's very primordial. And what you have is the snake, the vast snake here wrapped around the mountain and being pulled from either side, like a big tug of war, by something like, I forget the exact number, but something like 98 divas and 96 asuras. 98 goddesses, angels, and 96 demons. So again, the hara, the quotes evil, is going on a tug of war with the gods. The Dhyana Buddhas and all those positive, quotes positive things, all with the negative going back and forth, the demons of the greed, and they're pulling back and forth in the midst of the sea, and Vishnu is there in the center, the manifestation of God. This is how it's manifested. And from that, his consort, Lakshmi, comes forth. And above all, this creates the nectar of immortality. It first creates poisons, if you read the story. Most versions of the story have poisons created first. And that's scary. It seems to be poison. But if you keep on with it, it becomes the nectar of immortality. It becomes the intoxicating enlightenment of life. It becomes that cup of wine. It still only seems to have the deadly snake in it. The snake turns out to be the vehicle of enlightenment and of life. And out of that also are generated these delightful figures. I have one representation on my bookcase at home, which I got in Cambodia. Apsaras, which are like these nymphs, these delightful female figures representing the joy of life, are generated also from this elixir of immortality. And if you go to the temples in Angkor Wat, you have literally thousands of them sculpted on the walls, these apsaras. So all this positive stuff is generated by the two ogres, the demons and the gods, all are fighting on each other, seeming to fight back and forth. And the Harap and the Yetzer Tov, the two sides of the door here. Isn't it fascinating how you have such similar mythology in all of these traditions to represent that kind of wisdom? And I look into Christianity and I say, is there anything similar to this? There, when you have the plagues of Egypt, but then you have the Egyptians drowned in the Red Sea. And they cross the desert, and they kill all the people in the Promised Land who seem to be. So this doesn't seem to be working. And yet, what Jesus says 3 times in the Gospel of John, he brings one of the Exodus images out, where people are healed by the serpent on the pole, which is the image of Christ crucified. So Jesus himself is the serpent of the garden. Remember where it got separated out? There's the serpent on the tree right there. And here it's Jesus himself who represents the integration of all things. Or to go back to that passion resurrection imagery, Jesus has to go down into the depths of the earth. He descended into hell. And only from there he rises up. In order, as St. Paul says to the Ephesians chapter 4, in order that he may fill the universe in all his parts. Not just ascending, but descending into the very depths of the earth. So there is something that corresponds to that. You have to look for it a little harder, but it's there. Isn't all this fascinating? How we can interpret from a moral point of view, emptiness and form, absolute, relative, even good and bad, so to speak. All rat turds, of differentiations that are words, to see how reality really does work together. So, emptiness is exactly form, and form is exactly emptiness. And as Hakri shows us, and many of us shows us, there are all sorts of fascinating things we discover when we not just study it, but live it in our practice. We just have like 2 minutes. Anyone have any comments or questions? The ogres here. So we're actually going to chant this. We've been chanting this at the end of each one, so we'll do that right now. If you can stand with your